Christ is risen. Indeed, he is risen. Why did the myrrh-bearing women go to the tomb? Because of the stone that had been rolled in front of it, their going to the tomb didn't make any sense at all. Imagine that someone you love has died, and the day after the funeral, you remember that that person was wearing a watch that you wanted to have. Now, you might be bold enough to go to the cemetery at night with a pick and a shovel, but why would you go during the day, as the myrrh-bearing women did, with no tools at all, in order to sit and look at the piece of ground under which you know your watch is buried? It makes no sense at all that the myrrh-bearing women went to the tomb, unless they expected a miracle to take place. Now, miracles are funny things. Sometimes you expect one and have decided that you know exactly what kind of a miracle God should do, and nothing happens at all. And then there are other times when miracles come up and they surprise you. Stuart Briscoe tells the story of a friend who used an old fruit tree outside his bedroom window to occasionally sneak out at night without his parents knowing. One day his father said that he had decided to cut down the old fruit tree because it hadn't borne fruit for many years. So that night, the friend went outside and he attached apples to various parts of the tree. The next morning, his dad got up and called to his mother, "Mary, I can't believe my eyes. The old fruit tree that was barren for years has finally brought forth some apples, which is a miracle because it's a pear tree." In the case of our gospel reading for today, the myrrh-bearing women had heard from God in the Spirit that they could go to the tomb and the stone would be no problem at all. This is my favorite part of the story. I have many times in my life addressed particular situations that seemed like they were impossible, and a kind of miracle occurred, and I knew that God was at work. Now, I'll also tell you that there are many times in my life that I attacked situations that I thought I could resolve, and I was humbled by my failure. I'm sure you have too, but we can never let those experiences convince us that God does not have miracle working power, which he uses in our lives. We can never let discouragement become a stumbling block to us and set our minds against God. That's one of the symbols that the New Testament uses a stone for. It's a stumbling block. Some people have been tripped up by stumbling blocks and can no longer trust in God or have faith. "O Brother, Where Art Thou" is a comedy, probably many of you have seen it, set during the American Depression. The story revolves around three petty criminals who escape from a chain gang. One of them, the leader named Everett Ulysses McGill, tells his companions that he's buried money from a bank robbery near his property in order to persuade them to make a run for it. Toward the end of the movie, the law catches up with them, and the lawman who has been pursuing them is intent on hanging them immediately. As they are about to be hanged, Everett, Delmer, and Pete stand trembling in front of a large oak tree, deep in the woods and far away from where anyone could help them. They turn their eyes up to the three ropes that hang from a branch in the tree. Everett, who had no use for God before this, drops to his knees and begins to pray for a miracle from God. Lord, please look down and recognize us poor sinners. Please, Lord, I just want to see my daughters again. I've been separated from my family for so long. I know I've been guilty of pride and short dealing. I'm sorry I turned my back on you. Forgive me. We're helpless, Lord. Help us, please. As Everett ends his prayer, a small stream of water begins to run around his knees. His companions also notice the water and stare at it in confusion. As the wind blows, suddenly a great wall of water sweeps away everyone and everything in its path, including the lawmen who were about to hang them. The next scene shows Everett, Delmer, and Pete sort of pop up out of the water, and they're treading water on the surface of what looks like a lake. Delmer raises his voice in praise to God. It's a miracle. We prayed to God, and he pitied us. And Pete agrees with him. Everett chastises his friends as hayseeds for believing it was an act of God. He says, don't be ignorant. There's a perfect scientific explanation for what just happened. Pete says, that ain't the tune you were singing back there at the gallows. And Everett brushes it off and says, well, any human being will cast about in a moment of stress. It's frustrating to know people who have their minds so set against God and they will not change no matter how much the evidence around them tells them to. These are the kind of people that would say to the myrrh-bearing women, go ahead, good luck with the stone. I'm going to sleep in this morning. There was a man once who had a psychological problem. He walked around all day believing that he was dead. His family was tired and frustrated by this delusion, mostly because dead people don't contribute at all to the living. And to solve the problem, the wife of this man sent him to a psychologist. After reasoning with the man for 45 minutes, the psychologist came to an idea. He asked the man, do dead men bleed? And the man replied, of course dead men don't bleed. So the psychologist took a pin out of his desk and he grabbed the man and he stabbed the pin in the man's thumb. And pretty soon this little bubble of blood came up and blood began to stream down his hand. The man looked at his finger and said, well, what do you know? Dead men do bleed. Some people just can't be convinced no matter what happens. The second symbolic use of stones in the scripture is the monument. We raise monuments because we want to remember certain things, how we thought that all would be lost, but something happened that saved us. We want to remember those times and use the monument to give us trust in the future.